Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, July 3rd. Things have settled down a little bit, so today's stream has a much higher chance of being a regular stream, although we are starting somewhat early and so it doesn't seem like there is that much news, which might be perfectly fine, really. Apparently they've added some new solo stuff. The big disaster and the big news for me personally is that over the weekend, as I was playing Lord of the Rings, the adventure card game, of which I probably have one more episode, maybe two, to do, the computer just fully rebooted, and I can only blame a weird bugginess of Lord of the Rings for that. But in that, I had to look at the videos, which means inherently I haven't been looking at videos, and I need a different system, obviously, so that I am checking videos after they're recorded. I need to do some kind of spot check. I need to make it somewhat automated. But yeah, I haven't been checking out the video footage of pre-recorded footage, and it's specifically pre-recorded footage. Since, well, a very, very long time. It's just never really been part of my workflow to go back and listen to the audio and make sure the audio sounds fine. And so it turns out that at some point between, it seems, Prey and Prey Moon Crash, which are things that are scheduled to happen in like the 4th or 5th month a year from now. Like, they're so far ahead. At some point there, the audio settings on my solo recording scene in OBS got changed, and it started to record double audio. How can it record double audio? Well, that's in part my own fault for just how the system was originally set up. Now that we've updated OBS, there is potentially a way to readdress that, and I'll look into that more too. With some of the newest versions of OBS, application-specific audio capturing is now a thing, whereas there was a reason to separate out audio into a virtual audio channel and use, what is it, VLC Banana or something like that, Voice Banana, to have different audio inputs and outputs. All of that, I think, probably is not necessary with the newest version of OBS, and so we could simplify the whole process. But nothing should have changed in the audio settings unless I was just completely out of it, which is totally a possibility, that I was mentally gone and change the settings just because I didn't realize what I was doing. Or it's also possible that just in changing, in updating OBS, the audio settings changed. But yeah, so that means all of Prey Moon Crash, which is a series I kind of enjoyed, has double audio. All of the Last Flight of the Amazon Queen has double audio. Almost all of Lord of the Rings, the adventure card game, has double audio. And all of Lego DC Supervillains has double audio. So you're talking months and months of just bad audio. And I really did see some hope that 2024 would have been an era in which I would have gotten more viewers, and ironically I might get more comments on videos with double audio, so that might cause more people to watch the double audio. In a lot of cases, the games, it's not that noticeable. If you click on something and it makes a sound effect like that, if that echoes by a third of a second, half a second, and there's two sounds echoing like that, that's not super noticeable. But in Lord of the Rings, the adventure card game, when the narrator is speaking and you have an echo, that is super, super noticeable. So, but yeah, I really wanted the, let's see, we don't even have a single legacy pack to open today. I really wanted 2024 to be well scheduled ahead with good quality content, and now it isn't. Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, Indiana Jones and the Emperor's Tomb, also double audio. So it's basically everything I've done in the past 2 or 3 months, as far as pre-recorded. And I don't check the audio or the video of any files from live streams. So it could have been the same problem, definitely could have been in live streams, although the audio setup is a little bit different there. So yeah, there is a possibility to send responses to I didn't realize how short this experience was going to be. Well, I didn't get anywhere with this one too, so let's see, climax of showdown. I mean, it wouldn't have been terrible to earn that 1 pack. But yeah, I didn't get anywhere close to succeeding on this deck. This Build-A-Deck challenge in particular, I don't know if that really works for me. And this may just be the indication of a great time to skip an event entirely. What I ended up doing after was changing it from the Zodiac Tri-Brigade deck to just having 3 copies of everything that was already in the deck. So originally you start with 30 cards in the main deck, and I made One More Time Wizard, and I just crafted these, and it was like 60 of normal, rare, and super rare, so not a lot of crafting points used to do that. And so I was just trying to see if maybe the strategy around the partial build of a deck, if expanded to just have more of the same cards, would work. And the answer to that obviously was no. Well, then that leaves us really with just a new event, new season. And we're still playing Zodiac Tri-Brigade. And I don't know how to really get into Tier Laments and try and play that deck. I feel like by the time I even had the extra time to play Tier Laments, I would... Tier Laments wouldn't be a high meta deck anyways. I did have a slight thought in that if I was to move over to Marvel Snap, since I am still obsessed with that, maybe you could do a live stream on Tuesday and Thursday of a different game. I don't think that really works for me though. Well, the last thing I need to do is waste even more time live streaming. I want to make pre-recorded footage. I want to make good pre-recorded footage, certainly. I want to be able to focus on the games more and put more of a criticism and critical review on the video games I'm playing, which you don't see any of that when I'm playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Because there's not anything new really to see that much around Yu-Gi-Oh! Compared to how much you just have to play it. And I don't think Marvel Snap is good enough to potentially replace Yu-Gi-Oh! Completely. That being said, as Lord of the Rings drains me, and everything just it drains me these days, mentally and emotionally. I'm making like 1 hour of footage and then having to take 2 or 3 hours of distraction time. And I just there was a GameStop buy 2 get 1 free sale. It may still be going on, and so I just got 3 Nintendo Switch games, which I will suppose I want to have that. What is this? Face down card? I thought that was a face up card, but didn't realize that was just a different card back. I guess that highlights where having different card backs could potentially cause somebody to make a mistake if they're not paying enough attention. And there is something to say about digitally looking at a bunch of bright and colorful backgrounds versus the real world, where you would have a very flat, non-reflective playfield, playmat that you couldn't, anybody with decent eyesight couldn't possibly confuse the cards as much as you could digitally. But there is just like a lot of visual distraction here. If this was a pure black background, which almost should be a thing for just accessibility reasons, then my eyes would have been drawn to the card backs here, 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 and here being the same as that there. Yeah. So, anyways, I was saying, because Lord of the Rings adventure card game is draining me of energy, I had every ambition to install and play the new Harry Potter card game, and I have not gotten anywhere with that. I have installed the NetEase launcher, which immediately your Chinese company NetEase launcher issue comes into play. But I haven't launched it. And my hope was to make a quick look on the Harry Potter game and see if maybe I would decide to swap in Harry Potter for potentially Yu-Gi-Oh! Although it is going to be a hard justification, certainly, to go away from Yu-Gi-Oh! Because Yu-Gi-Oh! Has that 25 years of history behind it, which is both a blessing and a curse for it as a card game, whereas a brand new Harry Potter card game might lose its audience in 6 months, 6 weeks, and then it'll just be dead in the water, and then you'd just be back to Yu-Gi-Oh! But lower in the ranking. And yeah, the better solution definitely is to stop playing Marvel Snap altogether, than instead of trying to play it more. It's just not a particularly fun game, and the gameplay mechanics are the problems that still really have not been addressed to my liking, and they really can't address them to my liking because I basically want a completely different experience. Okay. Let's see if we can win here. I think we can. I am 100 short. Seriously? Why could I not banish the character? Well, color me confused. We'll try again, I guess. Let's see. 1, 2, 3. Try this in a different direction by placing this on the field and then activating this. Now we will summon that and summon that. Yeah, I guess I've somewhat lost my train of thought or what I was talking about. This I'm just gonna wait till next turn. But yeah, my ambition is going to be to establish a workflow, certainly, so I listen to a audio. Pretty much, I think I probably need to listen to the audio after recording a video, and not all the way through, but I do need to skip around, listen to the audio, look at the video, make sure the videos play. And I need to do that like after every recording, just to be certain, or at the very least at the beginning of every session and every day. Obviously these audio settings don't change that often, because otherwise this would have been a major problem in the past. But any little problem can pop up, and there's just nobody checking. This is where you get into one of those examples where if a YouTuber was more like a TV station, and a TV station was run the way you actually suspect it should be run, which is almost certainly not how TV stations are run, you would have at least 1 or 2 people constantly reviewing video, listening to audio clips over and over again. Checking for these specific errors. Of course, at a certain level, since I do have experience working at a TV station for a brief time, I can tell you at least that TV station was not run that way. A lot of the footage and stuff was sent by major TV stations, the ABC and NBC affiliates and things like that from New York City or LA. And so that footage, maybe that footage was getting tested by those people, but then it would have been sent via a satellite signal to the local station I was working at, and nobody was checking to see if those recordings were were being recorded right. And in fact, they actively did not care. Part of my job was to simply check what it looked like when it finally played out over the airways, and all trouble and any mistakes were only wanted to be detected. They only cared about detecting errors as they were being seen live. And all they did at that point, if a problem was detected, was to either assign blame to somebody, often I think me, or document it just so they could report it to the FCC, FTC. It was probably very similar to the idea of having an accident logbook on a farm where you're reporting accidents to the proper authorities that happen on the farm, whether somebody gets a paper cut or somebody loses a limb. But I bet most farms don't do anything to actually improve or prevent those things. They don't like reteach or re-educate employees for safety a lot of times, I would bet, on a bunch of farms. And yeah, I'm not any better, so I can't really cast that much aspersions for as long as my YouTube channel has been going, which is probably 6 or 7 years now, if not longer. I've been putting out footage, and this definitely has not been the first time that footage has gone out and it has had major problems. And sometimes in the instance of like Kerbal Space Program, there was no way to ever know that the video footage would have been just completely different. And in Lord of the Rings Adventure card game, I feel like the audio narration stuff probably is being played through a different bad engine, and that engine is in part causing more echo than the background noise. Otherwise, the whole game should be a lot more echoey. And there's no way to fix it, too. The only way to fix it is to scrap all the footage for 4 or 5 months, go back to having only one time slot for next year, replay all of those games from beginning, from scratch, and I just don't have the time or the interest in doing that. So I'm willing to compromise there and just maybe make a YouTube short that says, I'm aware of this audio issue, I deeply apologize. Unfortunately, there's nothing that can be done about it now. There's no real way to remove an echo in video files that I know of that would really be easy. YouTube at one point would like auto crop videos or suggest auto cropping videos or stabilizing shaky videos. I think they gave up on doing that though. Either that or I just dismissed those recommendations. But I suspect with the new YouTube Studio they quietly discontinued that as an option, and I'm not sure there ever was an audio fix there. My footage falls apart completely if I was to just completely remove the audio. Then it would just be a no commentary video. So yeah, I'd really just leave it in a situation where I have to ask people to either bear with it or mute the video and just watch or mute the audio and just watch it. So yeah, that's bad news. I still have a ton of work to do. I need to probably rearrange the audio. I need to redo the macro and upload and schedule a few more videos before redoing the scheduling macro to lead towards that new era of automation. I guess I'm more diversified now than I would have been years ago, in that we have all these YouTube shorts that seem to be getting the majority of views at the moment. YouTube promised that halfway step towards monetization, but I've yet to see them actually implement that. So, seems like they're going to take some time for that. Plus, I don't think that's really going to change much. There was the weird add hearts to your live chat feature, and where you could click hearts and they would just show up in the chat, and that seems like that's just completely disappeared. So I don't know if that was something they were experimenting with or what. Okay. Can we get to Zeus? Because we really need to get to Zeus. It's often hard to recognize it, but there is actually a lot of polish in a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel here compared to Lord of the Rings The Adventure card game, where it is very difficult to want to make a new deck in Lord of the Rings, which is awful considering it's a deck building game. It's very difficult to sort through the cards. Because I'm sitting 8 feet away from the TV, it's very difficult to read a lot of the text, which widely varies in its size. They just shrink and grow the text based on the box. Okay, I've lost. But yeah, there's a lot of polish that Lord of the Rings could have as just a card game. Instead of doing the one thing it does do fairly nicely, which is have almost a new playfield for every single player campaign area. And there's usually 3 or 4 areas per quest, and there's usually 5 areas per campaign, and there's 3 campaigns. So you're seeing quite a lot of different areas. They're somewhat nicely designed. But you have just a lot of problems in the actual card game. Like, arguably, I just think a deck building game around Lord of the Rings, the way they've implemented it, is just not that good. And I would want to see them try something different, because you've got that draw of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So you're going to get that audience to potentially, or a percentage of that audience to potentially play the deck building game, your card game. So don't keep it so incredibly simple that it looks way worse compared to Yu-Gi-Oh! Or even Pokemon, the trading card game, or Magic. There really isn't any special mechanic other than a threat level and a fate level, which you can ignore for at least half the time. Like, ideally, I think, off the top of my head, I thought this up while I was recording, you would want, not being a Lord of the Rings things, I may get this wrong, but you would want a more circular board with where you can play between 2 and 4 players, maybe even try to find a way to play single player. And in the circular board, there should be a method in which you can get 3 rings for the elves, 3 rings for the humans, 3 rings for the dwarves, 3 rings for the hobbits, whatever. However, the rings really broke down before Sauron created the 1 ring, which should be depicted in the middle to rule them all. And there should be a different method for the elf rings, cards that specifically make it more likely that you would win that territory and win a ring and win 2 rings, 3 rings, than there would be for the humans, which the humans would almost certainly be an attack versus maybe a magic for the elves versus maybe a hunger meter or willpower or purity meter or something for the hobbits, and then dwarves perhaps have a defense element to them, and then whoever collects the most ring before the 1 ring gets drawn and ends the game could be a different way of changing things about it. You could potentially have everybody drawing from 1 whole deck, which would get away from the deck building idea completely. Or you could have a side deck of events, and in that side deck of events the 1 ring is forged, and that's where the game ends. Whereas the actual Lord of the Rings adventure card game, digitally, you're always playing against Sauron, even if Sauron, even if it doesn't really make a lot of sense that you would be fighting against Sauron. He is always given like 5 cards or full hand at the beginning of his turn and a high amount of resources to play, whereas you're not given the same. You're given a 1 or 2 card draw, which often Sauron can reduce even further. And whatever deck you build will drastically change things, whereas Sauron's deck stays entirely scripted. And it's just characters with attack, willpower, and health. You end up, for the most part, putting lots and lots of characters in defense mode so that they will deal attack when they're attacked and exhaust a player at the same time by being the target of an attack. So yeah, it feels like at least a third of all your minions, of which you can only have 7, even though Sauron seems like he can have 8 or 9. But yeah, at least a third of your minions or hero characters are always being used for defense. You do have hero characters, and you start with 3 hero characters, and they are just like better versions of minion characters. So their strategy is not really very different. You have attachment cards, and you have trap cards. You really don't have too many spell cards. Particularly, I guess that's because in the Lord of the Rings mythos, it seems like anybody who does any magic is probably evil, unless they are one of the dozen or so wizards that are good. I do have a heavy suspicion too, now having done all 3 of the campaigns in Lord of the Rings, the adventure card game, that none of those stories you play in those campaigns are canon or written by Tolkien. It feels very much like they are made up stories written by somebody trying to ape Tolkien and like parody him, or not parody him, but just clone his style of writing, and it leads to a lot of doing the exact same thing over and over again. It's like BioShock. There's always a tower, there's always a wizard, there's always a underground area that nobody knew about. And then just as soon as you feel like you have kind of a handle on Lord of the Rings adventure card game, you get a you get at least I managed to get into a fight with a dragon that had to be destroyed by lowering both his massive amount of health and his massive amount of willpower. So, yeah. And they called that a legendary villain. So I have to assume that there might have been some other legendary villains. But there very possibly aren't, because it also feels very much like the game was just abandoned and never got really any update. Maybe it got one update and that's it. Do I have anything else I want to talk about? I already bought some Nintendo games. Prime Day is happening on the 11th. I've probably said this before, but I'm not really thinking I'll buy anything at all on Prime Day. If they give a sale to something that I was already planning on buying, or if they would just give a discount for purchasing anything on Amazon, that'd be great. There is a $5 if you buy a $50 gift card thing going on, so that might very well be your best bet, but that's about it. Like, I don't think I have the time, particularly right now, to waste looking at lightning deals for a bunch of toys and gadgets and things that people probably shouldn't buy. There is also some good news, at least in the United States, in that the FCC, or I think it is, or the FTC, one of the two, I always confuse them, probably FTC, is rewriting rules for fake reviews. Fake reviews being a massive, massive problem. And so they're going to try and crack down on companies that approve or get fake reviews, to the point where it might not be financially viable to have fake reviews. Of course, there's always the problem of your competitor paying for fake reviews on your product, and then your competitor getting an advantage as your product gets taken down or you get fined. Now they are also going to be trying to crack down on what they call brushing, which is when there's a bunch of reviews for a product and then usually I've seen this only on Amazon, the seller of the product changes what the product is completely, so you'll have reviews for what is obviously a blender on a page for a ceiling fan or something like that. And so they're going to try and crack down on that. Now weirdly, they are saying it's alright for people to offer you a gift card for a review, but it's not alright for somebody to offer you a gift card if you give a 5-star review. So yes, you can incentivize reviews. No, you can't incentivize what the reviews state, which is an odd compromise. And honestly, I would think incentivizing reviews overall is just such a dangerous slippery slope that it should be forbidden. So yeah, with that potential change of rules and regulations, next year we might be in a much better, safer position to potentially recommend random weird purchases. Financially and economically, next year might be better. You can always say that, of course, and yet next year might also be worse. The Raspberry Pis seem like they're getting back in stock at a reasonable price, but also I don't have any Raspberry Pi projects I want to do at the moment, and I wouldn't be surprised if sometime in 2024 a new Raspberry Pi comes out. Like we really are at the crossing line where Raspberry Pis need to have a split between a max version for running retro gaming emulation and really powerful things happen, and then a watered down version that potentially just doesn't have Wi-Fi built in, or an Ethernet port or USB ports, things like that. And they already have kind of made that level, because you have the Raspberry Pi Picos that they could, if you could upgrade the Raspberry Pi Picos to be as powerful as a Raspberry Pi 4 right now, and then come out with a max version, that's pretty much all you need. And then there's an even smaller Raspberry Pis that maybe those are called the Picos, that are really for single board projects and Internet of Things type projects, and aren't designed to really run a Linux operating system. And at some level those probably should be called something completely different. Call them Blueberry Pis or Raspberry Muffins. Something out of the Pi line. Even though you do have that great name recognition for makers. Well, let's see. I don't think anything I would summon at the moment would be better. This might be better. If we summon that, we summon that. Yep, that wins for us. Unless he can do something crazy. We're in a weird position today, in that I already know it's going to be a little slow and short. I probably should just embrace that and move forward. Because I could certainly play one more. It really would just come down to what daily quests are left to do. Basically none of them. So yeah. I probably need to try and carve out any time savings I can get from this as we go. And let's just do a duel live here. I think I mentioned on Friday that I was my air conditioner wasn't working properly, and I was waiting for a repairman to come. The repairman did come, and I had to end the stream early, and he looked at my AC compressor unit, and the fins were incredibly filthy because with a bad back and just general laziness, I have not ever gone and hosed off the condenser outside. But what was really wrong with it was that there was a partially broken capacitor in it. So $50 fix basically, plus a $100 service call, which is super cheap. And that fixed everything. Now my air conditioner is blowing cold air perfectly fine. And with me experimenting and potentially wasting electricity by having the fan on 24/7, it is a much more steady coolness. In the long run, you won't burn out your blower fan that's inside the house if you have the fan on nonstop, instead of having it in auto mode, but you are potentially going to pay like $50 a month extra in electricity to have it on nonstop. That being said, though, it is undeniably a more consistent coolingness. I'm feeling chills as it is, just because the wind is always blowing, which really I think is going to cause me to just increase the temperature and use the AC part less and less. And I guess the question is, the condenser fan outside and the compressor outside would be two motors, and I think you'd pretty much have to assume that they are either all about the same motors as far as how much electricity they use. The fan on the inside, the fan on the outside, and the compressor. So if all things were equal, just having the fan on non-stop and then using the compressor and the fan outside less might balance it out more. But that may not really be how it works, because it is also very possible that the blower fan in the inside of your house is blowing a massive amount of air through all the ductwork, whereas the fan that is just cooling off the fins and the radiators inside the compressor on the outside is actually doing way less airflow, and the compressor that is compressing the coolant potentially could be a very powerful pump, but motor compared to motor, it still may be considerably less power draining than the blower fan. It's kind of, you just have to look at the ratings on them, I guess, more than anything. So I'll just have to wait until an electricity bill happens. Although, yeah, it may not really matter. Anyways, one thing that was nice about this repairman is that I got to talking to him, and it is a sad statement, but kind of the truth. And I would say it's the truth in the area that I live, but it's also, I think, a truth worldwide, that this guy who owns his own AC repair company was actually trained as a programmer like me, and actually probably more successful in his heyday as a programmer than me, because he actually made programs and sold them to people. But obviously he couldn't make a career out of it and ended up being a plumber. But it was a very nice conversation to have with him. I often wonder, when having conversations in general, if I don't talk too much myself and not let the other person talk. But overall, it was way more of a back and forth, particularly talking about computer stuff, which is something that I desperately always want, and I think most programmers desperately always want, if you really have that programming gene in you. There's a lot of programmers out there that just take the paycheck and work 9 to 5 and don't talk about or think about programming at all outside of their work. And there's a lot of people in IT and programming who are also just not qualified to be there, and so they don't want to expose themselves as being inept, so they don't discuss things. But it was a very nice conversation to have. That is one of those examples where places like Reddit could be a lot better, in that if there was an easy way to find a r/programming subreddit, which I'm sure exists there, and then try and break down the different languages and different types of projects and different types of programmers who want to talk about it, that would be great to potentially build a community. Unfortunately, almost all online forums like that break down to people asking either really stupid questions because they're students trying to cheat on their homework, or they're just completely incompetent programmers, or they aren't programmers at all. Like, what would get really annoying is if somebody went into r/programming and said, hey, I want to make this new NFT program. I don't have any experience in programming at all. Can someone write this code for me for free and then post it? I imagine you'd get a lot of that type of stuff, or a lot of talk of cryptocurrency back when that was a big deal. On the other hand, you have a subreddit like r/programming has probably got some mod who is not the most socially adept, and who is banning people or yelling at people, a Linus Torvalds type personality, which that's not fun either. Guess we're done for today. Speaking of websites that are dying slowly, Twitter, it is generally assumed, stopped paying its bills, and has actively said they're going to limit the number of posts you can see to like 600 if you are unverified, and 6,000 if you're verified, Twitter Blue, which is to say you are not really going to be able to run any business around that at all, because 6,000 posts, or being able to only look at 6,000 posts a day, is way too few. Now, for my own personal experience, I don't think I would look at 600 posts in a week, because I just don't follow that many people. But it does definitely just come off as a weird thing, and another ridiculous mandate passed on by Elon Musk without really thinking it all the way through. If you were going to think about it all the way through, you would have announced that you were going to reduce it in a month, and then you would have put a sale out for Twitter Blue to try and convince more people to sign up to Twitter Blue, instead of making it feel like you're solely forcing people to Twitter Blue. Inherently, it gives off this feeling that Twitter sees the people who are looking at posts on Twitter as deadbeats, when they are absolutely the product that is being sold. Your eyes looking at ads on Twitter, your eyes looking at posts and commentary and having conversations back and forth, is incredibly the only value on Twitter. Twitter doesn't work at all if it's just a bunch of like Pepsis and Colas talking to Pepsis and Colas. um, and there's no actual people interacting or seeing those posts. Meanwhile, YouTube is increasing its crackdown on ad blockers. Like, clearly, the new CEO has a mandate to block people who are going even through extreme measures to block ads on YouTube. And eventually, it feels like everybody will have to watch ads on YouTube, or there's just stop watching YouTube. And I feel like that as a content creator, this is going to end up with more people just watching less of YouTube than anything else. So yeah, Twitter's getting worse. YouTube's getting worse. Reddit seems like they have successfully kicked out anybody who was protesting, either by this point or by this point next week. And Reddit now has very much a facade of everything is back to normal, but there are clearly some gaps on the front page of some subreddits that just are not being promoted. And yeah, I could see Reddit in particular being a thing that people stick with and just kind of forget about the protests, and then it just slowly gets worse and worse and worse. Of course, it very likely might be something like cutting the cable, in the sense that people for decades were crying, you should cut the cable, you should cut the cable, and there's always just going to be a percentage of people that are not willing to cut the cable and go to streaming services. A lot of people have gone to streaming services, and streaming services were good for a time there, and now they're just getting worse and worse themselves for different reasons. But a lot of people just don't want to bother with change. Like, the only reason I even have a personal Facebook is because I don't want to bother with change. And I've kind of drastically changed what I see on my personal Facebook anyways, in that I'm seeing fewer and fewer friends and family and more advertisements and memes. Anyway, let's burn through the news. Again, I don't think this is going to be a particularly long stream. Scorn has reached 2 million players, according to GameDeveloper.com, and I wanted to point this out, not particularly because Scorn has gotten a somewhat big number. I just kind of want to point out that my mind always goes into these loops of not really thinking that 2 million is that big. Like, the scale, for the most part, is all over the place as far as how many players you could have. Somebody out there, almost certainly Minecraft, has had 150 million players. But 2 million is actually very good. Anything over 300,000, I would say, is pretty good. Of course, the indicator of the number of players also isn't a very good metric for anything, because people could have played Scorn for 5 minutes and then given up, or 2 million people could have played it all the way to the credits, and that's a big difference. I will say, though, it does seem like gamers are more willing to engage with things, and even spend money to engage with things. First, more people, it feels like, as a percentage amongst gamers, are willing to play games than there are movie fans who are willing to watch movies, even if it's free. Like, your average person with Netflix is not going to engage with 80 to 90% of all the movies on Netflix. Whereas if there was a Netflix full of video games, gamers would totally engage with at least 50% of all the games on Netflix. And Netflix is hoping that that will become the case with mobile gaming and their offerings. Which, in fairness, I have not engaged with any of the Netflix mobile games, because there is this big separation in my mind, and I think most gamers' minds, between a mobile game and a PC or console game, as far as level of quality. Nintendo has closed its subscription service for Switch repairs after 1 year. The Wide Care service launched in Japan last summer. It never came out of Japan, as far as I know. This feels like yet another story where Nintendo of Japan is embattled with Japanese Nintendo fans as far as the Switch repairs service. Inherently, this is all around Joy-Con drift. I don't think anything else is really breaking significantly around the Switch. You could always drop it and break the screen, break the casing, something like that, but Joy-Con drift has been the number one problem. And even Japanese fans are complaining about it, so it obviously is a real problem. But yeah, if YouTube's new CEO is obsessed with blocking ads, Nintendo of Japan's new president is obsessed with reducing the number of repair costs and service that they were offering. Square Enix has just canceled the Just Cause mobile game before it launched. The title was only ever made available through regional early access, so must have been a particularly bad game. Although this is also Square Enix, so who knows, they could just be acting crazy to cancel it. But it's a free-to-play project, so maybe there was just going to be more investment needed to maintain it than it would be to shove it out and then abandon it, instead of just canceling it before it's even launched is a big deal. But also, maybe Square Enix sees that they need to maintain a certain level of value around their brand names. As they're losing brand names, they no longer have Hitman or Tomb Raider, so putting out a bad Just Cause game may have hurt sales of future Just Cause games. Here we have Naughty Dog putting out what I would assume is a professional cosplayer doing Ellie, which brings about a point, certainly, in that even in its heyday of Last of Us 1, there weren't that many people that were cosplaying as Ellie. And I don't know if in Last of Us 1 or Part 2, this feels like Part 2, Ellie was ever dressed like this or had a bow like this. So really it just kind of looks like a girl with a beat up face, which let's make a moment to talk about that and say that it would have to be an extremely rare scenario where people really love seeing a character's face bloody for it to make sense for a cosplayer to bruise or bloody their face. Particularly if you're talking female. This just looks like a domestic abuse victim, as it were. As far as the actual cosplaying, this image and photograph is pretty bad. I would say it's pretty bad in general, because you have really, really blurry image over on the left here, and my blur is not enabled. This is the actual photographer. You have totally out of focus image here, and then as you scale back, you're not really in a good focus until about right here, when you get in line with the same distance as her face. So obviously there's been a depth of field photo adjustment here, with whether in camera or in software, to focus on the face, the bloody and bruised face. So yeah, as far as costume, not particularly interesting. As far as makeup, not particularly interesting. As far as hair, you're doing this in snow and the hair is, I think, intentionally disheveled. As far as props, as far as the bow and arrow, these are just real bow and arrows. You didn't make anything here. This is just straight off the shelf. Same is true with this backpack and this like jacket. All this looks like this is just straight off the shelf cosplaying. Really, really bad, and it really just highlights how Naughty Dog is desperate for a larger percentage of people to be in love and stay in love with Last of Us, when Last of Us 2 made a lot of people fall out of love with Last of Us and Ellie in general as a character. Here they're begging for cosplayers, tattoos, fan art, and more to be on their Tumblr, which Tumblr as a service seems to be pretty dead. It never gained enough popularity before it had its controversy of its own, blocking porn or artistic nudes. But yeah, even when Last of Us Part 1 was out, though, I never really saw a lot of Ellie things because Ellie was an underage girl, and you just don't have a lot of underage girls cosplayed because a lot of cosplay leads towards the boudoir lewd cosplay, and that would have been awkward and inappropriate and out of line from what emotions are evoked in Last of Us Part 1, where you're playing as Joel trying to protect this little girl. There isn't a lot of father-daughter cosplayers out there where that would have made sense or worked. So yeah, if anything, I would imagine there was more Joel cosplayers back when Last of Us Part 1 was super, super popular. But yeah, not really even a particularly interesting character to want to cosplay as. At a certain level, there might be some actions or dialogue that would make a character interesting, but there's no easy way to take actions or dialogue and convert that into an appearance in a cosplay. There's a probably overlooked reason why most cosplay is lewd, or at the very least it's very pretty looking men or mostly women, in that cosplay is this surface level appearance thing that you're trying to emulate. If you were at Comic-Con, which I hear Comic-Con is potentially just going to be canceled too, which makes a lot of sense. But if you were at Comic-Con and you had somebody cosplaying Superman, you're not going to have them stand around and recite descriptions of what happened in Superman comics. You're going to go for the appearance of the classic Superman S on the chest and the cape and the tights. It's always been surface level. Whereas Ellie here really is a much deeper character, and deep characters just aren't good for cosplay. Let's move on. The ESA has promoted this education week to teach people how to program, I think, in Scratch. Maybe even Game Maker's Toolkit. Which is an interesting STEM-related thing, but that's really not what ESA has been about, and it does feel kind of just weird. See, this is a question and answer page. Yeah, this looks like this is probably Game Maker's Toolkit, not Scratch. So a more complicated programming software. Although I probably would still suggest just skipping over from Game Maker's Toolkit and go straight into either Unity or Unreal Engine. Yeah, the teaching Game Maker, Unity, or that they're suggesting Game Maker, Unity. I assume Game Maker is Game Maker's toolkit. Game Builder Garage, which is just a Nintendo Switch game, and the Godot engine. Weirdly, not suggesting the Unreal Engine, where I would say you would do way better to learn the Unreal Engine and struggle through it than take the half step, but maybe you need to take the half step. The level of STEM, and let's just be honest here, there is not really a lot of S or E or M here. It is just T for technology. No science, no education or math. It's science, technology, education, and math, I think is what STEM stands for. And really, it should just be STEAM, because they really should just throw art in there, and then it should have a second M for music too, because really all STEM is an attempt to rebrand everything that isn't a core curriculum of reading, writing, arithmetic, any kind of thing that might be an optional class. They're trying to reintroduce those as budgets have been cut for physical education, and art and music and things like that. The only one thing that these people who are promoting STEM as a concept would not also promote would be something like physical education or sports. And they would probably be all right with physical education as far as eating right and exercising, but they don't want sports to become the one vocational thing. Or is vocational the right word? I don't think it is. The one elective type thing to overrun everything else. All of a sudden, if you're trying to teach STEM and you include physical education, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of soccer parents who are yelling at the teachers, or basketball fanatics that are trying to get their kids to become professional NBA players, that's not what they want to focus on. But throughout this process, it does seem like their way of teaching programming is to start kids off very early on Scratch, which is basically Lego programming and useless to really learn. Then move them over to Python, which is a very weird language that is really just going to confuse the issue. And Python is not a language I absolutely hate, but it is just written so differently that if you learn Python and get good at Python, there's a decent chance that you'll struggle with the next language, which should be C++, or Rust based, even Rust being the newest thing. But for computer programming, C#, C++ is what you're going to need for Unity and Unreal Engine. But also a large amount of what you do in Unity and Unreal Engine is proprietary to those compilers, and you can easily make a game by dragging and dropping elements and writing very little C++ code or C# code. Godot is almost certainly C++ or C#, and Game Maker is probably C++ and C# too. Just different engines on top of them to make things a lot easier. Game Builder Garage is basically no programming at all, and thus too simplistic a concept. But the idea that you potentially are learning one language, then you have to forget that language to move to a more complicated language, then you have to forget that language to move to a more complicated language, is probably a bad way to teach it. If you were learning one way to do math in kindergarten, and then they teach you a totally different way to do math in first grade, then they make you forget that and do a third, more complicated way to do math in the fourth grade. That's ridiculous, and nobody would teach that way. Anyways, that's enough for that rant. Yeah. Generally speaking, I would say start with Python and jump to C++ or Rust after that. That's a 2-code transition. Notably, I'm not mentioning any HTML or JavaScript at all. Like, really very little reason to learn that code. And frankly, if you learn C++, JavaScript is close enough that you would already be able to figure it out. And arguably, maybe you should just skip Python completely and learn in C++. We need better education around C++ or Rust more than we need more languages. So, I suppose it's a bit of an end of an era for people who like the German company Duelists in their point-and-click adventure games, with Deponia being the biggest noticeable one. They pooped out, for lack of a better term, Lord of the Rings Golem, and now they are completely done making games. Daedalic has reportedly canceled the other Lord of the Rings project it was developing and is pivoting to game publishing for the foreseeable future. Which, this is very much them picking up their toys and going home, as an attitude. But it was foreseeable, certainly, too. Daedalic at some point either lost its talent or lost its will to make point-and-click adventure games. They were done with Deponia. Weirdly, they still are trying to have other people cash in on Deponia and still trying to sell multiple versions of Deponia. In fairness, they've sold so many different versions of Deponia over and over again that they've milked that series in particular like crazy. But they wanted to get away from point-and-click adventure games. They did not in any way budget enough time or education to pivot. It's almost impossible for a company to pivot to a different type of game because you basically have to hire a whole new group of people who already have those skills, because there is no on-the-job training for programming. Let's just admit that. Like, you're overworked already as a programmer. They're not going to take 6 months to retrain the entire 100-person staff into making a completely different type of game in a completely different type of style and engine of programming. So you'd have to hire new people, and then hiring new people, you're drastically changing the makeup of your company. And so the Daedalic now is almost certainly not the Daedalic that existed back when Deponia first came out. And yeah, they dug themselves their own grave by trying to change so much. Whereas it would have made a lot more logical sense for them to make a flat 2D Lord of the Rings Golem game if they had any kind of concept of a gameplay story there or a gameplay mechanic, which a point and click 2D Golem game kind of would have worked. A Super NES platforming 2D Golem game might have worked pretty well too. That definitely would have been in the single A, double A realm at which Daedalic has previously succeeded in making games instead of trying to make a AAA game. Inherently, though, this is also just them being acquired by NetEase, and then NetEase setting themselves up for failure, and then now I assume their parent company NetEase screwing them over. And yeah, I definitely would not allow my company, if I had a company, to be acquired by NetEase or pretty much any Chinese company. It just, you definitely are seeing the bad side of being acquired, in that Daedalic got no support whatsoever from NetEase. They didn't get a few more months to polish Golem, as far as we can tell. They didn't get extra financing. They didn't get extra staff. They didn't get other companies' uh, workers to come and help them finish or polish Golem. This is where acquisitions go bad, and that is more likely to happen than the case of like Microsoft, where you get acquired by Microsoft and Microsoft leaves you alone or potentially gives you more funding and helps you survive as a company. More often than not, being acquired by a company means you're eventually going to get screwed by that new acquisition. But also, as an end user, I guess I can't really complain too much that the company that made one of the worst received games of the year is saying, hey, we're going to slow down and just become a publisher. Although this is not the right response. I'd prefer them to say, we're not canceling our Lord of the Rings project that we're developing, but we are going to focus on all of our attention on developing this game, so we're going to go dark for the foreseeable future, and we're going to delay this game until it is finished right. Like, you could give at least the air that they're working on something, and then they could also say, in the meantime, we also are going to allow our publishing staff, that our non-creative staff, to focus to go down the route of publishing to try to fund the continued development of our next Lord of the Rings project, which we hope to be a lot better, received a lot better. But we've seen this with also, like Starbreeze, I believe, was one of the companies where they have jumped between we're making a game to we're being a publisher to we're making a game to we're being a publisher, just jumping back and forth because they're directionless and just don't have any idea of what to do. And generally, if you want to be a publisher, that means you have no other ideas of your own, and you probably should just shut down at that point instead of trying to say, we're going to try and profit from other people's creative works because we're so good at advertising and publishing, which in the case of Daedalic, they are not good at advertising and publishing. They did one interesting trailer a couple years ago around Lord of the Rings Golem, and then they did nothing to maybe establish a lower expectations or just advertise the game at all, which was probably a smart move in the case of Golem, but definitely doesn't show confidence or competence around being a publisher. I wouldn't want to use Daedalic as a publisher. Why not just directly use NetEase if you're going to do that? Moving on, Video Games Chronicles says Blizzard will reveal Diablo 4 Season 1 this week. Quality of life updates will also be detailed during the developer livestream, which that is shocking to me that people are playing Diablo 4 when they can play it, when the servers aren't being DDoS'd, but they're playing it not even knowing how long Season 1 will be. So I guess they're just playing a pre-season, and they already know all the characters and their progress is going to reset. I'm not sure anything carries over at all, but it would be completely different if a season was 4 months long versus a season being 1 month long. And I wouldn't want to put any effort into playing Diablo 4 until I know at least what I'm dealing with as far as how long a season is and how much time do I have to potentially grind a character to the max level. We are getting more information, I assume, from the lawsuit, FTC lawsuit, where Minecraft apparently earned 4 times as much revenue on the Switch compared to the Xbox. That makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense. People who are playing Minecraft are mostly kid or at least fans of kids' games, so playing it on the Switch makes a lot of sense. I don't know if you can get microtransactions on the Switch edition of Minecraft, though. So there might also just be some safety in giving your kid the Switch edition versus a Minecraft and Xbox version. And I really no reason why you would give them the Xbox version. You'd give them the Switch edition, and if they're still into Minecraft, you would give them the Java edition on PC. Apparently, Xbox was actually the smallest revenue driver where Minecraft was concerned during 2021. Which, yeah, potentially Xbox and Microsoft is doing too good of a job painting themselves as the far in third position console maker, that they are effectively giving you a list as to why you should not buy an Xbox if you were ever considering buying one. I can't help but think that that might bite them in the butt next time there is a new Xbox console, is in that you could easily have people remembering that all the sales and all the player base seems to be playing on PlayStation or Nintendo Switches. We have a Video Games Chronicle interview here where the Star Fox and F-Zero's Takaya Imamura discusses leaving Nintendo in the future. The 30-year Nintendo veteran speaks to Video Games Chronicle about his new manga and illustration career. And so here we have a drawing here of a cover, I guess, called Omega 6. Which, okay, that basically tells me everything I need to know in the headlines, in that he's moved to being a manga artist, which probably pays considerably less, which means he probably was pushed out of Nintendo because Nintendo does not care about F-Zero at all. They're basically never going to make a new one. This would have been the year with all the other remake announcements for them to say, hey, we're also going to have a remaster of F-Zero 1 or a remaster of Star Fox 1 for the Super NES. A remake of Star Fox 1. Apparently he also worked on Majora's Mask. I couldn't even tell you what that character is. Let's see. There's a long list here. Star Fox 1, F-Zero X. Yeah. And this is another one of those cases where I feel like either Japanese people are becoming more empowered to leave their jobs instead of staying with a job forever and just dying of overwork and chase their passion, which maybe he does have a passion to be a manga artist. That being said, this drawing would need several more passes, in my opinion. That seems pretty rough. It's a pencil sketch, sure, and very possibly he just doodled that while he was being interviewed. On the other hand, if it isn't people being empowered to leave on their own accord, then this is an example of Nintendo getting rid of somebody who they don't really care about anymore. There is actually considerably more F-Zero games on this list than I realized even existed, and Star Fox games in general. Omega 6 is a manga which stars sci-fi pilots exploring the galaxy in Moro's trademark retro futurist style, and is now out now in France and being translated to English as they speak. Weird. Is he a French guy? I don't think so. You've got Japanese writing back here, and the name sounds Japanese. But he's living in France, or they released it in France. Speaking of France, the president of France, I believe, tried to blame the riots on kids playing video games, which is, boy, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for excuses for the riots at that point, instead of taking the blame yourself for pushing back the retirement age in France. And then basically the next day, rioters looted and attacked his house, his personal home. So yeah, I don't think you have massive large scale riots just because kids learned violence in video games and have grown up and now just want to riot for no reason. If that was the case, then every country that's had video games for as long as France has, which is pretty much every Western country, would also be seeing the same level of violence and rioting, and that's just not the case. It could be the case, but I think most other countries are not going to blatantly just raise the retirement age. I'm noticing that all of these quotes here are not lining up and getting clipped off on the left side. Almost certainly that has something to do with my zoom. I need to remind myself in particular to come back and see if I can adjust whether the zooms work. I wanted to see what happens if I just zoom in the size of text and don't zoom in pictures, which is an option in Firefox. TT Games is weirdly still promoting Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga with a cheat code Clone 15, which will spawn up to an additional 15 characters if you own Mandalorian Season 1 DLC. To activate, player must select the Mandalorian, then select Grogu, then changes Grogu to Mandalorian. This will create a duplicate Mandalorian and Grogu. Which this is a weird cheat, and it's weird that we're finally getting to a point where these cheats are really being used to sell DLC, or just the cheats are being used to do anything at all. Pretty much every other Lego game has had cheat codes that you could enter just in case a really young character needed to cheat to unlock something. But there's really no reason to ever actually use the cheats, except for maybe the very first game unlocked a unique character you couldn't get anywhere else but for the cheat. But they stopped doing that pretty quickly. And being able to just to clone the Mandalorian up to 15 times doesn't seem particularly that interesting. If we scroll down, TT Games in particular, they really don't have anything else they can talk about. And here we have a classic, this crashed for no good reason. Firefox clearly has some memory leaks, or one of my plugins has a memory leak. Yeah, when you look at the banner here, the only Lego game they're even trying to promote is the Skywalker Saga, because that's the only one that, with the Unreal Engine, and was supposed to be the reboot of Lego TT Games, and it is now very questionable whether they will get the support from their new parent company AT&T to make more TT games, or whether they'll just continue to be able to get the license for the right price around Lego minifigs. Otherwise, TT Games is going to be pretty dead in the water. They could try to make a Lego game without Lego minifig characters, but it probably would not sell as well. I think we had already kind of talked about this, but Valve, according to GameDeveloper.com, says that legal uncertainty surrounding AI models is behind Steam not approving some games with AI generated art in it. In general, They're saying that we're following copyright law and our understanding of copyright and AI art at the moment. We're not making a curation decision where we're saying we just don't like AI art, thus we're not going to let it in our storefront. They are saying that if you can get an AI art model that is trained on images exclusively that you have the rights to, then they will say yes to that. Although the US law said that even if you did do that, then the end product is not copyrightable because a human didn't create it, which at a certain level, Valve and Steam is going to have to decide whether they are making the statement or not that uncopyrightable content is not allowed on their storefront, or at least games with a decent amount of uncopyrightable content. If you were to, say, make a fully open source, every single bit of it is public domain game and put it on Steam, would Valve have a problem with that? Probably not. And it wouldn't be. There's plenty of content in other Steam games that is public domain. Pretty much all the ScumVM games are not copyrightable anymore, or public domain. Their copyrights expired. So Valve hasn't had a problem with that. They just don't want to get DMCAs effectively from content creators who claim that their art was used in an AI model to make a game, which would be hard to find and hard to prove. Moving on, Video Games Chronicle says PlayStation Mobile has lost yet another top executive. The boss of Savage Game Studios has left the company less than a year after it was acquired. He didn't even stay around for a full year for some kind of golden parachute, which maybe they weren't offering anything like that. And let's see, I'm still all over the place on cosplaying. Here we have, in these summer months in particular, you're going to see more bikini stuff. Street Fighter 6 does seem pretty popular, and we have a bikini Chun-Li, although it's a bit of a stretch, certainly. And the pose, I would say, is not particularly good for Chun-Li. Chun-Li in any fighting game character should probably be standing up doing a fighting pose or a kicking pose or something like that, not leisurely laying on a chair. Moving on, South Africa is the latest country to approve the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal. So it really is just the UK and the US that are actually challenging it, and then Canada said they weren't really in favor of it. THQ Nordic has said that it is, quote, aware that AEW on the PS4 has been crashing for a lot of people, which is not a confirmation in any way that they're going to actually try and fix it. But yeah, that's definitely not good press. And then we have a PC Gamer article that was linked by Cyan, which I need to run the ad blocker through this. Riven's remake gets its first gameplay reveal, and the original Myst sequel's co-director is heading up the project. Riven is looking great, and Richard Vander Windy has been revealed as the director, which that seems weird that you'd have a big reveal on who the director is, but I guess that is somewhat of a big name. Overall, though, this looks like they are just making a very faithful remake of Riven. The puzzles look like they're going to be exactly the same. The only difference is now everything is going to be in like an Unreal Engine style 3D environment instead of a click to move to one area environment. Riven needs a remake, but then you also run into the problem of what do you do after you remake Riven? Do you make Mystery Exile, which Cyan didn't really have a hand in and may still be very much owned by Ubisoft, or do you go in a completely different direction? The big twist, I would say, is to probably have the events of Riven change a little bit in that final cutscene so you can go in a different direction and make a potential third Myst game by Cyan that is not Mystery Exile and does not lead to Myst 5 End of Ages. And yeah, you probably mostly just ignore Uru, since that isn't really canonically going to change the events of Myst 1 or Myst 2 anyways. Riven being Myst 2. But yeah, I think you need to go through a book at the end of this Riven remake and end up on a completely different planet. Although, at a certain level, why bother to try to even make a third Myst game in an alternate timeline when they've already made their Myst-like game and released it in the form of Firmament, which, let's point out, nobody here is talking about Firmament. So that's been failed to be promoted and somewhat abandoned, because now we're talking about the Riven remake at the MystCon. The fact that they still have a MystCon, Mysterium Con, is amazing, but it also probably is yet another convention that needs to shut down for modern times. This is definitely the year of conventions dying and ending, as far as video games and just conventions in general happening. Harvester Games put out this screenshot for a review of Burnhouse Lane, and I didn't really care about that, but it does put out a interesting view of what a publisher gets to see when they're on Steam, in that you have this box as a developer or publisher. I assume he's claiming to be the developer. Is he the developer? Of this one? And maybe. But he has a special link to people's profiles, and he's censored out this, but you could just type in this and I'm sure get to this person's profile. He has a developer response ability that only developers have, and then it has guidance that says in most cases you should only respond if you need to address a specific issue or to clarify misinformation. For suggestions on what to respond, please view the moderating best practices guide. And then over here there's another orange moderator tool that lets you flag things. So I'm not sure what specifically you can flag. Flagging of a mod, then review. For suggestions, view this. Yeah. So this bottom part is for suggestions on how to use this, view this guide. This is probably of a moderator. So you potentially can flag comments to then have a moderator look at it, and you can probably create moderator roles as a developer on Steam. So that's an interesting little insight. That being said, doesn't have any practical information, not really. People put comments on Steam games fairly unfeathered. Nobody really flags comments or tries to censor comments on Steam, and I think Steam would shut down any developer who was trying to flag a ton of comments or censor comments, or even a developer who responds to every negative comment with hostility instead of grace. But it is interesting to see there's even this much moderating tools. Moving on, Disney Speedstorm has been confirmed for a free-to-play launch in September, which I guess that will line up directly with the Hot Wheels re-release. Although the Hot Wheels re-release is going away from free-to-play September 28th after completing its early access period. And then apparently Assassin's Creed Black Flag is being remade, which would make a lot of sense. And it would definitely be a case where I just never got around to playing Black Flag, so now would be a decent chance to skip and just play the remake. And then, let's see, at this point, we have, let's see if I can click on this picture, a Lara Croft cosplayer done in a drag artistic fashion. There's no real need to question whether the cosplayer is male or female. If you're going drag, I would assume the first thought would be that it's a male doing Lara Croft in drag, but at the end of the day, this is a interesting mix of a cosplay of the Lara Croft Tomb Raider reboot, and it kind of shows a great example of why the Tomb Raider reboot was not as well cosplayed, in that you have these arrows sticking out of her and bloodstains and torn shirt. It's not anywhere as iconic of a outfit as the triangle boobs of the original Lara Croft, but also it's just not particularly pretty. So once again, you have like a bloodied character and a bruised face. One would assume that this blue and this red might indicate bruises and bloods, although the blue in particular is just far too bright blue. But then you also get this weird mix of drag, which drag generally has the goal of not trying to pass. Like, you're doing drag wrong effectively if you're trying to put on makeup to make a male seem like they are a female. Drag is designed to be gaudy and out there and really catch people's attention and be something unique on itself. And then you're mixing that with cosplaying, which cosplaying is more trying to pass, for lack of a better term. Excuse me there. I'm gonna cough some more. Sorry about that. Anyways, so I was saying drag is trying not to pass as an actual woman, whereas cosplay is totally trying to pass as an actual woman, in the sense trying to pass specifically in this case as Lara Croft. So you're mixing the two in kind of a weird way, which is fine because that gives you some uniqueness as far as your appearance. I doubt this idea would catch on much. If anything, I feel like this would just have a lot of extremely conservative people who are anti-trans, somehow trans also becoming or already are anti-drag. They could very easily start to try and boycott Comic-Con and places like that if there's one cosplayer out of 1,000 that happens to be doing a drag style or cross playing in general, where you have somebody cosplaying a character opposite their gender, usually a man cosplaying a female character. Nobody really complains if a female character cosplays a male character. But there's also already been those kinds of problems too, where extremely conservative people don't like cosplaying because it often shows more skin than they're willing to let their kids know exist or see. But for the most part, the conservative parents like that weren't letting their kids read comics anyways. Marvel movies probably have done Comic-Con a disservice in that it has established this thought that it's once again potentially establishing this thought that everything is Disneyfied like the Marvel movies when they aren't, and that comics are exclusively for kids when they very rarely or ever actually for kids. Moving on, we're taking way too long today. I'm out of practice and moving slow. July's top 20 games on the Steam Deck are listed. Street Fighter 6 being one to notice. Hogwarts Legacy. What's interesting, I wouldn't have really known that Hogwarts Legacy was playable. Still getting some classics like Witcher 3 and Binding of Isaac Rebirth. Spider-Man Remastered. Persona 5 Royale. Slay the Spire, still a classic. NBA 2K23. Fallout 4. Skyrim. Actually a decent list of games being played on the Steam Deck. Remember, the Steam Deck is also on sale. The National Video Game Museum also put out a interesting tweet that's educational, which is nice because they really don't tweet quite enough, and when they do, it's often just promotion of things. When it would be nice if they did have some more educational things. At least one educational thing a month would be the minimum to expect. But they go, did you know the Power Glove was first developed by VPL Research as a $10,000 VR device for computers called the Data Glove? It was then licensed, simplified, and sold to Mattel. Which, no, I did not personally know that. $10,000 back in 85 or so when this came out would have been ridiculous. You're talking $50,000 to $100,000 product. This is the only known prototypes still in existence, and it's on display right now at the right here at the National Video Game Museum. Which, noticeably, I'm glad to see that there is at least some stuff behind glass at the National Video Game Museum. A lot of their stuff is out for people to run up and touch, kids to run up and touch. If the kids are not straight up encouraged to touch and interact with most of the displays. And it's nice that they have some of that, but it is also important to recognize that some of the Nintendo and video game stuff of old is invaluable and needs to be protected for future generations. I'm wondering what this big orange coil here is about, whether that's supposed to be a light or something else. But yeah, you can see it's sitting on probably the box that it came in. It looks like a box that's super old, and there's what look like ultrasonic sensors plugging into an ISA slot on a computer, which computers don't have ISA slots anymore. That's a predecessor to PCIe slots. And there's a lot of connecting wires on this. A lot of connecting wires. The actual Power Glove here, these are probably only worth maybe $100 or so. Now weirdly, in the background here, I see some glasses And I don't know if this is a different display. It would have to be a different display being shown off here. And over here I see some headphones. So they've got several little hexagons of things on display. It's not super surprising though that technology would start off incredibly expensive and then be simplified. And it's important to point out that Power Glove was actually a pretty terrible device. What they don't have here on the Power Glove is these, I think, are receivers that you might have needed a Wii bar at the top of your screen for the Power Glove. Something to transmit for these two receivers. And you still, a lot of times, you just really couldn't do much with the Power Glove. It would have definitely been a device forgotten to the annals of time if it weren't for the fact that the movie came out, and I can't even remember the name of the movie. Well, there was a movie that came out, and it had the Power Glove shown off in that, and it introduced Super Mario Bros. 3. Yeah, I couldn't even tell you what the name of that movie was at the moment. Then Tiny Tina's Wonderlands is giving out more codes. And then Harry Potter Magic Awakened, which then really would just take me back to these cosplay things, which I was thinking I need to figure out a way to put the cosplay pictures at the end of the streams, but then I'd never actually get to them. So, whatever. Here we have Quiet being cosplayed. Let's make that a little bit bigger. Interestingly, here you have Quiet being cosplayed, but her actually wearing a lot more clothes than she actually is depicted in the game. Nice action shot here, although this is almost exactly the same as the bow and arrow. You have, I think, just more costume being shown off with this badge with this, and I think the gun prop probably works a little bit better too, although maybe there should be some slightly less actiony shots amongst all of this, because there's too much emphasis on the posing of the cosplayer and not enough emphasis on showing off the costume. So I'm not getting a really good picture of the boots or the pants or even this elbow piece. Quiet in a Sniper Wolf uniform is what that's called. So it is a different one. Then here we have a deleted one. And then here we have Tifa. Tifa, as a cosplay thing, gets done right so often that it kind of generically waters down the cosplay effect. I've just seen so many people cosplaying Tifa, and it's such a relatively well done cosplay that competition has gotten fairly high. And it's not hard to get like a top that's white, but it is a little hard to get all the armbands and the skirts and shoes to line up, suspenders. But yeah, competition is high, and so I've seen a lot of that. And then here we have a Genshin Impact character, which by far this is one of the most intricate costumes we're seeing. Alright, well, that's more than enough time wasting. Let's start going through the general information, general news. 2 hours into the stream. The summer sale ends the 13th, so you've got a couple weeks basically to purchase anything you want to purchase. Although Steam Deck is about the only thing that catches my eye. It would be nice, certainly, to get like the Star Wars thing, Skywalker Saga, Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga, which it's surprising TT Games isn't just promoting sales. It's actually fairly surprising that most video game companies aren't promoting sales as much as they could. The summer sale, though, it's not really doing anything else. You can do the trading card stuff by going through the creator feeds, Discovery Queue, but that's pretty much it. They're not even pointing you to the point shop, so you see they're not even really interested in that. There is a decent amount of games at the moment, and a decent chance that people haven't played all the games at the moment. In a lot of ways, this is your last hurrah before the this winter fall sales of new games start to happen. This is your last chance to get an old game and play it before we start to have the interesting new games come out. So yeah, again, we don't have a lot of news. We'll go through Video Game Chronicles. My middle click mouse button does not seem to be working. Why is it not working? I want that to work. You know why it's not working? Because everything crashed, didn't it? I bet that's the exact case. Let's see if I can get that to enable and re-enable. And just hope that works. Yeah, okay. Maybe that'll work. But yeah, we started early, and you can kind of see over the weekend there really hasn't been a lot of news. We're slowing down potentially just because the Summer Games Fest stuff was the big speed up of announcements, and now it's time to slow down until we start to actually have game releases, or until we get towards Black Friday. No video game company is really jumping on the bandwagon of having Prime Day sales. It would be kind of nice if Prime Day as an event was actually a good event where things were on sale. If all of a sudden you started to see video games going on sale, that'd be great. Even buying like Steam gift cards through Amazon.com might be worth it if Prime Day could give you some kind of percentage back on that, or promote something else. So many stories we've also already talked about, like the Call of Duty's latest anti-cheat update, making cheaters hallucinate imaginary opponents. Daedalic ending all internal development after the disastrous Lord of the Rings colon release. Now, noticeably, if its Metascore is only 38, then and 38 kills a business, then why do we have 1 through 0 or 0 through 37? Honestly, even a score of 50 probably would have killed Daedalic's business. We need to create a new scale. Just not use numbers at all. Just start reviewing things with something arbitrary like letters or symbols, or have a 5-point histogram scale of enjoyment, time for money, action, multiplayability, value per overall. Yeah, don't have a combined score at all. Just have 3 to 5, 4 out of 5 ratings. Black Flag is reportedly getting a remake. Disney Speedstorm is being launched. Do we have a link on this to Steam? No, but I will want to check that out, so I'm going to leave that article. The crashing of AEW for PS4, South Africa approving Microsoft. And Valve clarifies, quote, it doesn't want to discourage games with AI generated content. Recent bans are, quote, a reflection of current copyright law, not, quote, our opinion. Which, on another level, that's something corporations love to say, is that, we're just following the law, it's not our opinion, don't blame us, when we're actively taking actions and actively being involved. Corporations in general, everywhere, love to hide behind the law when they can and completely ignore the law when they don't want to. If Valve or any company was 100% spotless as far as following the law, then that would be one thing, but we know they aren't. We know no big company is. There's too many laws, particularly in corporate law, that you can't, that it's just too easy to break one of them, but there's also too much arrogance in corporations that they aren't breaking a lot more. We already talked about PlayStation Mobile losing another top executive, and Blizzard Season 1 being announced, and them shutting down the Japanese repair service. And then that immediately brings us into Gematsu articles. R-Type Tactics 1 and 2 have been delayed to 2024, according to Gematsu. Daedalic shutting down internal development to focus on publishing. Daedalic has published a couple of things already, so they do have some experience in that, but not much. A Toho New World for PS4 and 5 launches September 12th. This is one of those Toho series of games. Master Detective Archives Raincoat DLC schedule announced, which I wasn't really expecting this type of game to have DLC. Which, at a certain level, I'm not sure that Master Detective Archives has even been released yet, so announcing DLC feels a little premature. I'd kind of like to see all games only announce DLC after the main game has come out and been a success, instead of the idea of having people pre-order not only the main game but also DLC and season passes and whatever other things you can get people to pay for ahead of delivery. Disney Speedstorm launches September 28th. That was what we were looking for. You can see Disney Speedstorm at the moment, though, mostly mixed at 67%, although it's up to 78% with the latest updates. Remember, there was, I think, some real complaints around one specific car winning all the time, one specific driver winning all the time. I still also have some complaints around, you have these Disney characters, but then they're all in these kind of too realistic for their own good racing outfits, when I would prefer them just to be in their regular outfits and their cars to be a little bit wilder and crazier. Is there in-app purchases in here? It doesn't seem like it at the moment. But there's 3 different versions, at least, of DLC. Although the Ultimate Bundle is being promoted above the Deluxe Edition and is more expensive, which I wouldn't have really expected that. Naruto X Boruto Ultimate Ninja Storm Connections Special Story Mode trailer has been detailed. I have no idea who this character is or who this character is, which is not saying much, really. I watched a YouTube video talking about apparently 4 different Ben 10 cartoons have been made, and I was definitely too old for Ben 10 when it came out, so I have really no understanding of those series, but apparently it did pretty good if it had 4 different series for being a Cartoon Network based cartoon trying to compete with other cartoons that Cartoon Network didn't make but aired nonetheless. Overall, though, I'd say Ben 10 never got popular enough that it would feel like you would need to go back and watch any of it. Not like something like Power Rangers or even the Pokemon cartoons, where you might potentially have your kids watch the Pokemon cartoons or Power Rangers out of nostalgia since you watched them when you were a kid. I don't think there's a lot of parents out there that would have their kids watching Ben 10 for that same reason. And Cartoon Network in general just never really succeeded in making cartoons that had enough impact or lasted long enough to really compete with other offerings from other animators. Although, in fairness, Nickelodeon, I think, did a way worse job than Cartoon Network has ever done. And even Disney does a pretty terrible job of making cartoons that matter. The cartoons for kids these days are almost exclusively going to be on different streaming services. Some might be Disney Plus, some might be Netflix, some might be Hulu, but yeah, most of those cartoons are watch it and forget it, and they won't have lasting impacts. Anyways, I'm just rambling about cartoons for no reason, and really I had no reason to even watch the YouTube video. Sword Art Online Last Recollection DLC Ritual Bonds has its first details if you want to check that out. This seems to show the entirety of the harem of female characters that the main male protagonist ends up interacting with. There's like one male character, it looks like, here in this entire group outside of, I assume this is Kirito. Sword Art Online weirdly became a harem series for some of its shows when it set itself up more in its original season as a isekai trapped in a MMO, another world, family, like, going steady simulator, because Kirito fell in love, I guess, with Asuna fairly early in the first season of this lady Asuna in the first season, and then they basically got married and got a nice cabin on the lake and lived together and just had a life in the MMO, and through some digital trickery had a kid, which might be who this Silica is, a digital pixie character. And so yeah, it was just a home building simulator. Whereas in later seasons, this Lifa character turns out to be Kirito's real world sister, who also has a crush on him. And then pretty much every other female character probably had a crush on him at some point. It becomes this weird harem after you've seen a true love path in the story. Yeah. And yeah, I'd say Sword Art Online probably gets pretty bad in some of its later seasons. It's not amazing great in the first season even. Moving on, I am rambling all over the place. Sandland tank and jump bot gameplay is available. This is from the maker of Dragon Ball. Still kind of trying to figure out whether I could find a way to be able to appreciate this weird art style that is very Dragon Ball-esque and appreciate the gameplay concept, which a little bit of gameplay would certainly be helpful. This was showcased at the Anime Expo, and so I think the Tokyo Game Show has already happened for this year. So we are getting obviously more Japanese announcements today because of the Anime Expo compared to Western announcements. Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash has been announced for all consoles and PC. It's a 2 versus 2 action game developed by Viking. I don't recognize any of these characters, but I assume that this is a Bandai Namco anime based game. Seems like you fight with either magical abilities or fists or magical creatures. Noticeably, this looks like gameplay footage. This looks like gameplay footage. Then this looks like a cutscene. This looks like a cutscene. This looks like a cutscene. And this looks like a cutscene. 2 versus 2 game fighting. Or 2 versus 2 action game. I'm not sure if it's really a fighting game or not. It's tagged as a fighting game. I don't know if there's really a game out there that owns that variant of fighting games, as it were. Guess we'll blur here and see what this looks like in motion. There should be a series that pops right in my head for 2 versus 2 fighting. And the closest thing I could even think of is possibly like a Marvel vs. Capcom game from a long time ago. And even at that, it's one character, then you swap in the other character. It's not 4 people on the screen at the same time. And since I assume this is based on an anime, the amount you recognize and understand on this trailer will be drastically affected by whether or not you've seen the anime. Yeah, I'm seeing one-on-one fights happening here, and then an assist character jumping in. Noticeably, I'm also seeing the lady with the hammer and nails getting punched and shot across the field. Yeah, it seems like there are some very far blowback actions and a lot of magical attack actions. You do run into that problem when you have a bunch of male fighters fighting each other, that it feels a little different when you have the female character come in and get punched around. Particularly in this case, it seems like there is only one female character, and there may be some monster characters, but they all present as male for the most part. Yeah, I would say the wolf and the panda, you'd assume it is male by default too. So it's probably important, if you are going to have a fighting game with a female character, to try and balance that out more. At least have one more female character, female presenting character over here, to try and balance it out some more. So there's at least 2 of them. Maybe there's something in the story around that, but yeah, you ideally would want to have at least a third of your game fighting characters as female if you're going to have co-gender fighting happening. Moving on, Sympathy Kissed is coming to the West in early 2024. This is an otome/young maiden visual novel localized by Idea Factory International. Here we can click through the screenshots and see all the hunky anime guys being shown. More and more, I've moved myself to saying no to visual novels being on my wish list. Like, more and more, I am buying or brainwashing myself into believing the idea that I really shouldn't make coverage where I am showing every single screen of a visual novel, or I'm showing at least every single screen of a single path of a visual novel. I still would cover visual novels of the best, but I do have another reason now, another excuse to skip visual novels, on top of the other excuses of not really wanting to play them and definitely not wanting to read and narrate them. Moving on, My Next Life as a Villainess, All Routes Lead to Doom, Pirates of the Disturbance is coming west this winter. This is also an otome young maiden visual novel from Idea Factory International. The story here is based on, I believe it's an anime. I'm not sure if it's a female character originally, but the main female protagonist, gets reincarnated in a different world. It's not just isekai'd, but also reincarnated into a different world of a visual novel that she already has played and mastered. And she knows that she is reincarnated as the villain of the story, and at the end of every path, the villain of the story is punished and gets a bad ending. So the struggle is you're playing, or you're now trapped inside the body of the bad guy that's fated to get a bad ending, and you have to do whatever you can possibly do to try and get the people around you to like you and not end up being the villain of the story. Which is an interesting twist, certainly, but it's a twist that I think makes more sense as a situation comedy than it probably would do as a romance visual novel or young maiden visual novel. I'm not sure if it's romance or not. And this feels like this is an expansion even on that. And so there may be a My Next Life as a Villainess other game that has already come out and been released, and I've already just forgotten about it. Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters is coming to the Xbox One and Series in 2024. So, delayed release, but it is actually getting moved over. Now my ad blocker is broken because of it's crashing. Really need to figure out a way for it to stop crashing so much. It is very consistent. The Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters game is very positively reviewed, so I guess I'll put it on the wish list, but my feeling was that this story may not really matter much, that it's kind of a side story, or it was an attempt at a reboot, and it seems like they didn't stick to that reboot and may have rebooted again. The Neptunia games effectively, I think, reboot no matter what, almost every time. There is a new Neptunia game. Same general premises as far as starting over from scratch, having amnesia, and then going through a fantasy world. The only slight difference here is that they went from more of a taller kawaii art style to more of a moe art style, with the sisters being younger looking. But yeah, nothing particularly interesting in those screenshots. Meanwhile, I believe this is their newer game. Neptunia game maker are Evolution is coming to the West in 2024. And I think the R Evolution implies that this is potentially an actual remake of one of the previous Neptunias, or at least an attempt at an actual remake of one of the Neptunia's games. One of the earlier ones. Although they've already kind of remade the Neptunia earlier games once before, so this would be a remake on top of a remake. Arguably, these games probably could benefit from getting a second or third remake if they actually put the effort into it. I'm not sure they really will put the effort into that, though, versus just trying to sell the same product over and over again. It's almost like Idea Factory has locked down the concept of what their JRPG games are going to be to tell the exact same stories, and then they're just reselling the same concepts over and over again. You have slightly different looking characters this time in the screenshots, and slightly improved graphics possibly. It's quite a lot of screenshots that they've put out, but you really have to applaud Gamatsu for being willing to just show every single screenshot. So yeah, these games are coming to the West. Which that gives us a little bit of hope. We've seen less games being announced in general on Gamatsu and from Japanese companies, but it does seem like it's starting to scale up again, and we haven't had a lot of stories of games just being censored or rejected from being on platforms like Steam or on game consoles. This FTC Microsoft Activision Blizzard merger trial, almost certainly you should bring out the concept of censorship on Sony. I don't know how you can get that into the public record. Sony may make it fairly easy, but if you could file paperwork that says, hey, Microsoft listed these games, and these games because it believes in free speech, whereas Sony censored these games, and these games. That would be another angle certainly to go. But I bet it's an angle they don't really push, because I think Microsoft would love to in the future have the opportunity at least to censor games if they want to choose to do that also. Grand Blue Fantasy Relink adds Fairy, according to Gamatsu, which I assume is this character here. And then Grand Blue Fantasy Versus Rising adds Nier, which I assume is this character. So two different Grand Blue Fantasy games getting new characters. My favorite lewd waifu mobile game with Destiny Child is teasing a new skin for an old character on its loading screen. And we are only a couple days between the next update in which two new characters will be introduced. They introduce a new character basically every month. Tsukuhime, A Piece of Blue Glass Moon, is coming to the West. This also was announced at Anime Expo 2023. Anime Expo and all the Japanese events tend not to really announce that much. It is probably worth pointing out here that they've made 300,000 shipments in Japan alone, which potentially makes Tsukuhime a potential interesting game. It's only going to be for the PS4 and the Switch, it seems, though, which I'm not surprised that we wouldn't see that happen more occasionally too. It is an extra bit of effort certainly to make a Xbox version if you didn't bother to make an Xbox version for Japan and you're a Japanese company. The Japanese indie games publisher Hyperreal has been established. The first 3 titles set to showcase at Bit Summit Let's Go, which I wonder when that actually is going to happen. Apparently, hyper real stands for revolutionary extreme aesthetic leading. So there's a game called 34 Everlast that was announced. Or it's to be announced. The release date's to be announced. And then there's Juju Hospital Tokyo Idili Anatomy Division. I don't think I pronounced half of that correctly. Different art style, looks like a visual novel. In a weird way, if I make YouTube shorts around a game like this, it may not be in English. So I should double check, make sure these are going to be in English. And then the third game is Dome King Cabbage. Let's see what this looks like. Well, that looks weird. That too is in English. So we put all three of those on the fall list. And we'll make YouTube shorts around all those. Don't really know when Bit Summit Let's Go is going to happen, though. July 14th through July 16th. So, relatively quick. Team 17 is going to publish new titles from Lichsphere Studio, Lichhund, in development for consoles and PCs, although they're not really naming the games, so there's really nothing to do with that information. And then Atelier Marie Remake, The Alchemist of Selberg, has a how to play trailer, which I'm not sure you really need a how to play trailer, but okay. They are going to try and promote this Atelier game as much as possible, I suspect, to see if they can get people to be willing to play with this different chibi art style when they probably are more nostalgic for the flat 2D art style. Although, in fairness, this chibi art style is probably replacing what would have been really tiny 8-bit pixels or giving you just new animation in general. That brings us to GameDeveloper.com. Monster Hunter Rise has topped 13 million sales worldwide. We already talked about Daedalic quitting, Scorn selling 2 million, Scorn having reached 2 million players. Apparently, American Truck Simulator is running ads for real truck companies. Truck companies are like many companies in the United States, constantly advertising for new hires because almost exclusively they burn out their employees like crazy. And employees is a bone of contention. That's not the right word. Employees is the phrase to use, certainly, because your time is incredibly controlled as a trucker. And yet, I am certain there are plenty of truckers out there who think they are independent contractors and own their own trucks, and they're paying to repair and maintain their own trucks. But at the end of the day, what makes you an employee in the United States is if you're being given set hours and your time is strictly controlled or controlled at all, and the jobs you take or reject are controlled. And truckers, definitely, all of that is true. But on top of that fight, there's also just the fact that trucking is very dangerous, very time intensive, a little bit more physically exhausting than you might think, and it's just extremely demanding. and it doesn't pay much. It doesn't pay as much as it should. It actually pays a decent wage compared to some other things in the United States, but you have to really enjoy driving. On top of which, like a lot of jobs nowadays, trucking is on the verge of being replaced. It makes a lot of sense that even if we can't get full automated cars, we could right now have 18-wheelers that connect to each other so that one 18-wheeler would just be automatically driving and following the 18-wheeler behind it, in front of it. And so then you would only need one driver for a long caravan of multiple 18-wheelers, or even connecting 18-wheelers to a fully automated system and having them drive the highways automated, and then as soon as they get into city limits, having a single driver drive each of the trucks would be a way of eliminating a lot of trucking jobs too. Automated driving on highways is a lot easier than stop and go traffic with signs and people running across the street. Stop signs, stop lights, all of those go away when you're on highways or outside of cities. The only reason why it's not efficient at the moment to take whatever is on an 18-wheeler and put it on a railroad is that there are just not as many railroads out there, and it takes too much effort to unload something from an 18-wheeler to put it on a rail cart, a railroad car, and then put it back on a truck, which you'd probably have to do. If railroads had slightly bigger rail cars that they probably can't have because of tunnels, you would just drive an 18-wheeler into the back of a rail cart and then drive it out later, have somebody drive it out later. Moving on. I've had far too many rambles today. Side tangents. PlayStation is looking at allowing Roblox to exist on its consoles. Sony's Jim Ryan thinks it's time for a user-generated creation platform to set up a home in the PlayStation ecosystem. Yeah, almost certainly Jim Ryan is salivating at the possible profits Roblox could build for them. Although, in all fairness, PlayStation has already tried this with Sackboy and probably 2 or 3 other games, or at least a couple iterations of Sackboy, and it really hasn't worked. I don't know if it is just because there's a controller in the hands of PlayStation players and you need a mouse and keyboard to really be creative, or if there's just a different attitude as far as how players are treated and what players expect when they're playing on a PlayStation versus playing Roblox on a computer. I assume is what you would mostly play it on. We already talked about the legal uncertainty surrounding AI models behind Steam. We already talked about Minecraft earning 4 times as much revenue on Switch compared to the Xbox. And we already talked about Just Cause Mobile being cancelled. So, I'm still not sure I got the programming right as far as the auto blur being enabled. It did occur to me that I should probably change my clock scene so that it indicates me when auto blur is enabled and not enabled, instead of just having to figure it out. But yeah, theoretically this should trigger the auto blur. Now, is the auto blur enabled? I don't think so. No, this is blurred. So still not really there. So we're doing some fall list cleanup. This one needs a little bit more time, and since it's not before January 1st, I'll give it that time. Heartbite dating game. I think we can probably say no to this since it's not very relevant, even though it came out in March. I don't think the art style is particularly that good either. But again, I'm just trying to limit the number of visual novels that I potentially would play. Heart of a Birdcage is not even out yet, so we'll wait till it's out to say no. Here we have another visual novel, Heart and Soul. I like the idea of a story around Greek myths, even a visual novel around Greek myths. That being said, I just don't think this art style is quite as polished, nor is it really relevant. And this was from February of 2022, so that's consideration too to say no to it. Head Baseball. I think we've got to say no to this one. Hazel Sky. This feels like this might be a single A, double A type game. Mostly positive. Is it in early access? No. $12.49 English and Portuguese, Brazilian language. I do want to actually see Portuguese, Brazilian games succeed a little bit because I think there's definitely some companies in there that are actually trying to make good products in comparison or in contrast to like Chinese games, where almost every Chinese made game is they don't even have an understanding of what the level of quality of games should be, and they're making the cheapest possible products and trying to sell it. And yeah, eventually I think Chinese game developers will peer past the Great Firewall of China and start to see what the level of quality is of games outside of their country is, and realize that they're going to have to step up the quality considerably, and it's going to take them a long time to get to that point. 2, this one doesn't even have a release date. That is going to be a danger, certainly, as we'll end up with a follow list with just to be announced games that never get updated. And I don't think the SteamDB plugin helps me at all on that aspect. I would have to probably click this to find out. Let's see when this was first updated. May 13th was when it was updated. Is there a way of seeing when it... Yeah, it seems like May 13th is the oldest bit of data that they have, so I'd have to assume that's when it was first released. Let's see, Hawken Reborn is mostly negative, so no reason to keep that on the follow list. Have a Nice Day is very positive. Is it in early access? No. I have seen several games with a Grim Reaper type character, and so there might be some slight confusion in my mind as far as which one this is. Gearbox Publishing. Interesting. If anything, this came out March 22nd, and people, or I've already forgotten it. And I guess there's not much more to say there. Put it on the wish list. I think we can say the Shooting Soccer Zombies game should leave. I don't know why that was on the follow list in the first place. And then Hauntini hasn't been announced yet. So that goes. So maybe this is the wrong marker. And maybe auto blur will enable it now. It did. So auto blur is working. That being said, it's working on the wrong marker. I can fix that though, now that I've identified the problem. Should I give this game Realms of Flow a chance? No, it looks like it's a visualization thing. We have a lot of things that just didn't load. So here we have a grotesque body with the guts falling out of it. Survival and horror. Mortanis Prisoners #1. What's funny is this kind of looks like there might be something here. Instead of just having a flashlight character, you have a character with a gun. Although it also creates that weird situation where if I make a YouTube short on it, and then the very first thing that happens is you have a horrific person with their guts falling out. Like, is that YouTube family friendly for the first minute? When 12 seconds of that first minute is someone's guts falling out? I'll leave it to YouTube to let me know whether it's acceptable or not. And so many of these pages did not even load correctly. Typing Bullets is the next game that come out. Doesn't quite have enough visual polish. That's kind of the problem with typing games in general, is that there's just not ever any effort on making it look very, very visually nice. This also kind of seems a little crazy in that you're apparently typing over here at the bottom to move, and then each of these extra buttons I assume you have to press to shoot at them, some of which are kind of crazy. Like going through F1, F2, F3, F4, F5 is not something you really need to learn in typing. Yeah, there's obviously an emphasis here on trying to make a shooting game more than a educational typing game. And I think that's where this mostly fails, so I'm going to say no to that. Yeah, I wish there was a better way than having the auto blur just enabled with every new page tab changing, but there really isn't. I want to get down to 0 flashes of hardcore pornography in video games. Gunspector here. I think you're too zoomed in here. Even though this is a tiny little pixely character, a shooting game where your enemies are that small and your bullets are basically 1 pixel wide, and then you have just really boxed in, too zoomed in visuals. I think I'm gonna say no to that. Hover Kitty, the Hoververse Chapter 2. Looks like it's a joke troll game. I'm going to say no to that. Because of either a zoom issue or... No, what it is my plugin that makes the scroll bars disappear has failed, because all the plugins failed when the tab crashes. So this scroll bar here is always there. It's just hidden usually, but it gives me the feeling that the game might be in the adult section, because the adult section also has a gray bar right about there. And see, I don't even have a plugin installed to make tabs suspend or go to sleep or save memory or anything like that. So maybe I need something like that. But yeah, in general, I think it is just a case that Firefox is not as well designed as Chromium and Chrome. Which at a certain point, I guess I could jump ship yet again and just install Chromium instead of Chrome. That being said, I'm not even sure that that's the smartest move. This vocabulary galaxy orrery, I'm gonna say no to. Because like the Android open source project is mostly maintained by Google, and Google has abandoned the phone call app and the messaging app. So if you were to make an open source Android that didn't have the Google Play services and the Google tracking built in, you'd have to make your own phone dialer. And so they've recently stopped supporting those apps before they were. Chromium, basically the same thing. Google supports, for the most part, Chromium, and at any point Google can just move more and more features into Chrome exclusively and then leave and abandon the code for Chromium, which is often what you see is that these for-profit companies take advantage of open source projects and start to close source new features they add, and they're not contributing upstream, as it were, which is very much what Google likes to do, is not contribute to the upstream version, which is always going to be the open source version. Anyways, no to vocabulary. It's weird to have a typing game and a vocabulary game. Corlax Escapes is next. Maybe I'm being a little too critical, but this just doesn't look like there's really a game here. Seems like you maybe fly around and shoot and collect gems, and that's about it. Keep the lights on. Alright, I'll give this one a chance. Make a short around that. By the way, on Friday I did go through all the new games and make shorts on them. There really wasn't anything important enough that needed to be mentioned, though. Although noticeably, I do weirdly feel like I'm not seeing as many adult games in this last stream or in this stream. Definitely feels like at this point I should have seen at least one adult game. Lab Phobia. Pixely escaped the room, it looks like. I'm gonna say no to it. Looks too simplistic. Disharmony. Maybe exactly the same thing. Too simplistic. I kind of like the art style on this thumbnail, but you would kind of have to have the characters that zoomed in most of the time. As soon as you start to get into a zoom out, the art style is not terrible, but it's not really something that grasps my attention. Here we have yet another Backdoors game. Now, the fact that Firefox crashed and it crashed all my plugins is not something I really can take any blame for, or would take any blame for. I can't really stop Firefox from crashing. I wish things were more robust and worked always, but that's just not reality. So here we have a 3D CGI lady called in a game called Goddess Detective 2. She's wearing a black thong. She was doing this animation of stretching her hands up and moving her hair. Her hair is clipping through her shoulders like crazy in the video. Now she is just walking around basically an asset flip house. I assume she's supposed to be looking for something. The camera is clipping through the walls. Like, this really is just showing off how terrible the game is. And like, her only animation seems to be her stretching her arms up, waving her hair, and then if you hold it long enough, she'll stretch her hands all the way outward. Ridiculous. This is obviously probably a Chinese game. Let's see. They're saying it's early access, it's English, Russian, and traditional and simplified Chinese. Yeah, everything screams Chinese game. Chinese garbage game. Although even at this, it's probably more effort than you normally would see, because it is 3D CGI. The mature content, even though it is in the adult section, says the heroine wears more revealing clothes, plays carefully in crowded places, which is to not say don't play in crowded places where children may be, just play carefully. Honestly, by my standards, this character is really just wearing underwear / a two-piece bikini, something you would see on the beach perfectly fine. So I really don't even need to blur it. And that's another trademark of Chinese games trying to sell themselves like they're adult games when they really aren't. In that they show characters in their underwear but don't go any further than that. Here we have Dice Mayor, which I didn't reload this page, but I don't think I really need to say no to that. And then Green Island will reload. This looks like an asset flip survival game. I said in a previous recording that I owned Raft, but apparently I don't, so I guess it was just something I was thinking about purchasing. I also drastically need to figure out how to get more people back on the chat. Like, I think what I'll do is I'll do an experiment for the rest of this week, and I'll just not put any chat decorum or chat rules on the comments, and just see if what happens there. That would save me some time anyways. So we'll just basically address issues when they happen and not put any rules or regulations or decorum on the chat initially. This Flower Fury as a game doesn't look interesting. And so I might be very wrong too here. I might be attributing the lack of chat messages to changing the chat decorum rules, when the lack of chat messages may have a lot more to do with just it being summertime and people having different schedules, or just different people watching my YouTube videos. I am still getting a small amount of views, a pathetically small amount of views. This Accelerate Zone is weirdly a little too slow for what it seems like it is supposed to be, and then it's now potentially speeding up in the video to be too fast. It's an infinite runner basically, with shooting and both in the foreground and the background. I guess not technically an infinite runner. Yeah, I don't think it's quite good enough though. Beneath the Deep looks like a horror game that I'd probably say no to just because of the dark screenshot syndrome. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Then we have Bro Chicken trying to create name confusion around, I guess, Brotato. And the top-down twin-stick shooter games like Vampire Survivors, as far as the style that it looks like. Yeah, if I was smarter, I probably would have figured out a way to have slightly different content in the summer versus during the winter and spring. Summer and fall being different than winter and spring. That's what Good Mythical Morning kind of does. And I don't know if that works best for them, though. This Infinitum Vitas, it's got too many actions and too much heads-up display for what it looks like. Looks like it's an attempt at an RPG game, but I just don't think it's good enough. You know what? I'll be generous and put it on the follow list. Do I want to make a YouTube short around it? Yeah, we will. The main thing I need people to say on the chat too is if I'm not taking the blur off, because that's something I'm going to make a mistake on. I'm going to have to train myself to always come to the right side and turn the blur off. Forgotten War here doesn't look interesting. A lot of rougher around the edges games today, more than even usual. Interesting, we have a breakout game, but then in a couple of these screens you have pictures behind it, but the pictures behind it don't really do anything other than distract from the breakout game, and at the end of the day it is just a breakout game, so I have to say no to it. I forgot to program to turn off the background image too, come to think of it, and so we are getting that half flash every time it turns on the blur. Does it do that when I do this too? Yes, it does. Agent Jump here doesn't look like anything. Yeah, I was watching several retrospectives on YouTube of old shows like the TV show Chuck, which in general I would have liked Chuck to be more of a successful series than it really was as far as the writing. And Heroes is of course the main example of something you would like to see more success around. And I was wondering if maybe you could take a series like Heroes and during the writer's strike just remake that series completely. That would be weird, certainly, to say, hey, we've got this series, all the episodes are written. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense to do Heroes, which already suffered from the writer's strike, and if the writer's strike went long enough, you would just run into the same episodes that started getting bad after the first season. It would probably make a lot more sense to take something that worked fairly well and remake that. Like MASH, weirdly, is like one of the most long-running, most successful shows ever. If you just did a word-for-word remake of MASH with new actors during a writer's strike, that might work for you. Particularly in the case of MASH, you could pick the good episodes and get rid of the garbage episodes. Speaking of getting rid of the garbage, I'm gonna say no to this game. Or you could do, say, the Quantum Leap TV series. They are writing new episodes for the continuation of Quantum Leap, but it wouldn't be crazy to potentially have new actors act out the stories of the original Quantum Leap series. Or Star Trek, like new actors redoing all of Star Trek, the original series. with better graphics. You could take any fairly successful series and do that. Babylon 5, most of the actors, at least half of the actors in Babylon 5 are dead now, so just remaking it with new actors. If you establish that as an idea, certainly, at least you could fill your time slots. But I imagine it is just cheaper to fill your time slots with garbage game shows and things like that. Nope to nin. Secret Summoner. X-Files might be a great example of that too. You could take the good episodes of X-Files and then you have only 4 or 5 major characters that you need to focus on, and you could just have new actors redoing it in the same way plays recast, and then you have the play visually a little bit different, but the words spoken at the play are exactly the same. And really, if you're going to take that idea, you could also just take some plays, some Shakespearean things, and make video versions of those relatively cheap during the strike. LiDAR Survival doesn't look like anything. It's a little hard to tell how many of these games are left, but it is pretty easy to tell that most of these games are not worth really mentioning. Here we have The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, The Legend of Shu Han, which is just an RPG Maker game, which noticeably we haven't seen any other RPG Maker games today. In fact, I've seen kind of a considerable slowdown on these types of games, which maybe that's just people have stopped making them, or maybe we're seeing the after effects of a lot more curation as far as what games are allowed on Steam. Although if they were really curating and rejecting a lot more games on Steam, then there should just be less games on Steam, and it really wouldn't make sense that we're still seeing garbage games like this, unless it's going to be... I could see Steam Direct being a one-time thing where, as the publisher, you give your tax information, your name, your address, all that stuff to identify you personally, and then your first project is listed for $100, and then the second project costs a lot more to be listed on Steam, or even if it costs $200 for the second one, then $400 for the next, and it just kind of doubled to list on Steam. That could prevent a lot of garbage game developers from flooding Steam with multiple games, often without a certain amount, within a very small amount of time. Although in all fairness, if they just limited people to listing one game per month and only charged $100, that would work just as well. Blood and Bullets here does not look visually polished enough. We have Beat the Pitchers. Fairy tale creatures pitching baseballs, and you're playing baseballs in this bright neon area. I feel like the visuals here just look absolutely horrible with that bright neon style. And this is a VR game. A baseball VR game does make some sense, and even anime girls in baseball make some sense. The mascot or fairy tale characters, though, don't really make the most sense to me. It would almost make more sense if they were mascots and not just generic fairy tale creatures. But yeah, That's gotta be a no. And here we have a game called Future Offline, which doesn't look visually polished enough. Looks like it's a dungeon crawler. It's almost as if they held back a bunch of garbage games for the Steam Summer Fest, or the publishers of these games wanted their games to come out during the Steam Summer Fest and not the Summer Game Fest, the Steam sale, not the Summer Game Fest. There you have what looks like a pretty low effort visual novel. And then we have a game that is completely in what looks like Chinese or Japanese. It looks like it's another cheating on your neighbor's husband, wife, with his wife game. Maybe a MILF game too. Single lady, flat 2D, kind of bright, colorful palette, anime style lady with big breasts. Although in this case, the game is Japanese exclusive and it is $15.99, and the entirety of the description is also in Japanese. So I guess if you knew what this said, you would know what kind of adult content is in here, but without that, you're left at that. It's a good indicator, though, and a good sign to see any adult content, particularly Japanese-made adult content, come to Steam, even if they're not bothering to bring it to English, because this is an indicator that there are more and more Japanese PC gamers coming to Steam instead of going to other sites or trying to play games on consoles instead. This next game, I think, is from probably the same publisher. It's yet another flat 2D visual novel anime character. This time I'd say the lady has average sized breasts, and I'm not sure. This feels more like a horror, and the lady is in a hospital. Again, English not supported, $15.99 Japanese only. I'm almost wondering if this MB Game Studio, who is the publisher, is potentially releasing older adult games that would have been available on other storefronts years ago and now bringing them to Steam. Which that's certainly fine too. There almost certainly are some gaps that could be filled in that case. Next we have a game called Melody Mania, which looks like it's a singing game. It doesn't look terrible enough. Certainly I'm no expert on like singing games, but I would have to just assume this looks good enough for what it is. Let's see if we could get into some details before I potentially put it on the follow list just to take it off again, since I would never actually play a singing game. Demo songs are included with the game, or add songs in the community grown Ultra Star format or the industry proven MIDI format. So it kind of seems like there probably aren't that many songs in it, and that you would have to start to make your own things. ultrastar.txt or MIDI with lyrics as far as the karaoke files. Yeah, I don't know if there really is enough standardization around karaoke. It would be nice if there was more around that. Honestly, anybody who buys any CD should be getting a karaoke version of that song on the CD. or anybody who buys a song digitally should be getting the karaoke version. Again, karaoke, though, probably not that popular in the West compared to Japan. So this is kind of like a software thing that's barely a game. It says it has an AI powered editor. I do want to see the reception on this. But yeah, I would never actually play it and try and cover it. Microsoft tried to have a karaoke type game at one point during the Xbox 360 area. I'm gonna be generous and give this one a chance too. I don't think we're gonna say yes to this one though. Slimming or sliming. I think this time it's sliming. Alright, we're almost done. Flow State Max Chill Edition. Seems like it's an idle game. Lo-fi beats to help you focus. Yeah. I think we'll just say no to that, because I don't think there's really a game there. We have a game called Cease to Breathe. I'm going to say yes to this, even though visuals are fairly rough. Double cheeseburger, medium fries. I think we can say no to that. Fox Run is an infinite runner. Yeah. Rise of the Funkies. Don't think there's quite enough visual polish here. I like the general idea of a funky character being maybe a protagonist here, but visually I don't think there's enough polish here. And there is a danger here too that this is at some point just going to break down into racism, so you have to be careful about that too. Stickmin and the Sword of Legend we can say no to. And then that's going to be the end of the show, which that should have also triggered disabling the auto blur, which let's see if it did. Yes, it did. Okay, so yeah, at 3 hours and 18 minutes we did pretty well there. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's a link down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.